Let's go ahead and kick things off here with the two favorites in this division. The 49ers, the best price you're going to find out there on them, about minus 160 to win this division. The Seahawks, about plus 230 to win the division. So let's take a look at this 49ers team. They were 13-4 last year, Mike. They have Steve Wilks in as the new defensive coordinator. There were some losses for this team, and I don't know that a lot has been made of just how many guys did depart, and it's still a very good roster. You look on paper, it is still one of the better rosters in the NFL, but Mike McGlinchey is gone. You got Samson Ebukam that is gone. Jimmy Ward is gone. Emmanuel Mosley is gone. Of course, Jimmy Garoppolo is gone. Azeez Al-Shaair is gone. Charles Minhus is gone. So there's a lot of guys that are out of town. Now, they did bring in Javon Hargrave. They brought in Isaiah Oliver to play slot corner for them. And the roster was pretty deep as it was anyway, but it's not like you're going to be looking at the exact same team out there for the 49ers this year.
No, they had a lot of losses on the defensive side of the ball. They keep their big guys, right? Armstead's still there. Bosa's still there. Warner's still there. So very, very good football team on the defensive side of the ball, but don't have the same depth that they had there last year, specifically in the secondary. And the big question with the Niners every year seems to be, can they deal with the injuries? Because every single year they've seemed to have a rash of injuries. The offensive side of the ball, you got multiple players who are generally injury prone, and Brandon Ayuk, Deebo Samuel, Christian McCaffrey. And then you have the quarterback question for them, which I think is the biggest question overall. We've talked ad nauseum about Trey Lance, about Brock Purdy, about Sam Darnold. Who is going to start? What is Brock Purdy going to look like coming off this elbow injury? I mean, the reports out of camp is that he's throwing rockets, but look, every report out of camp seems to be pretty positive for a lot of these guys. So I'm not really taking that at face value. I want to actually see him on the field. We're not sure when we're going to see Brock Purdy on the field. We don't know who the week one starter is. That's why this number is 10.5, not 11.5 or 12.5, which I think is interesting as well, because I was expecting them to be at 11.5, and now we're seeing the 10.5 number. That is the only reason I would consider going over here, is that I do think this is a win shorter than what I expected off of the last couple of years in San Francisco.
Now, training camp is training camp, but we did find some pretty honest beat writers yesterday who said it was a very rough day for pretty much all the quarterbacks on the 49ers side. Brock Purdy apparently threw 2 or 3 different interceptions going up against that Raiders defense. And then oddly enough, now, again, training camp is training camp, and you're not always getting the 100% effort from the veterans out there. But apparently the Raiders offense also moving the ball up and down the field on the 49ers defense, which I thought was a little interesting as well. Now, this is just one beat reporter who was going out there and kind of giving us his opinion on all things, but it was a 49ers beat reporter who was being pretty honest that Purdy looked bad. Like it was not a good day for him by any stretch of the imagination. So you have a guy that's coming off of a surgery here, Mike, and now you look at this offensive line that Pro Football Focus has 18th entering the season, and that's with Trent Williams. So like you have an offensive line that is ranked 18th heading into the season with the best left tackle basically in all of football. So imagine if he were not out there, what the rating would actually be on this offensive line. And so if we have at least a little bit of concern, which I do, about Purdy in year 2, or whoever, again, if it happens to be Lance or whatever it might be, if you do have questions about the quarterback position as it is anyway, and now you factor in that this offensive line is at least kind of middling, and that's with one of the best players in the NFL on this offensive line, I think that there is some sort of realm of possibility and a range of outcomes where this team really disappoints if these quarterbacks can't get time to throw the ball.
Yes. I mean, there is definitely a scenario here where San Francisco disappoints. The fact that I could ask the question, who's the best quarterback, and you wouldn't get the same answer from everybody on this roster, if it is Trey Lance, if it is Sam Darnold, if it is Brock Purdy, tells you all you need to know about the troubles that they have at that position. And we talk about Brock Purdy a lot because he is supposed to be the starter here. He has had a lot of turnover-worthy throws that were dropped last year in the 8 games that he started for the San Francisco 49ers team. There's a reason he was Mr. Irrelevant in the draft. It's not because he was just throwing darts in college. Let me tell you, I bet on a lot of Iowa State games when he was playing up there. And I wasn't always happy that Brock Purdy was my quarterback, and that was at Iowa State. And now we're at San Francisco in the NFL. I don't necessarily think it's a good thing that you have 8 games worth of film for the entire NFL to study on what he was doing. Now, I will give him credit. His accuracy was very good when he had a clean pocket. He was throwing his passes at a 77% clip from an accuracy perspective. That's a strong NFL number. That's not something he did in college, though. And yes, Shanahan's scheming these guys wide open. You have all the talent in the world. But without an offensive line protecting you, this could be a big problem for Brock Purdy. I also don't love this San Francisco schedule. They get the worst of it. When you look at when they play Seattle as well, they have to play Seattle on a short week at Seattle on a Thursday night. And then Seattle has a mini bye when they go to San Francisco. So the team that's going to be chasing you in the division has a significant edge in both of the games that you are playing against them during the regular season as well.
Yeah, I am. I'm curious about this team. I'll put it that way. I think that Shanahan certainly has his work cut out for him this year. The thing that you mentioned is the thing that I've kind of been preaching all off season, which is Brock Purdy. There are not very many NFL players that kind of sneak up on teams, but like Brock Purdy snuck up on teams. This guy was not even supposed to make the team, much less be a starter and go in. And so these defensive coordinators were not watching film on this guy. They were not familiar with his tendencies and everything that he tends to do. And guess what? Now they do have that. Like you mentioned, there is tape, there is film, there is guys that spent all off season, trust me, spent all off season wondering how is this guy having success in the NFL? And they're figuring out ways to maybe combat that. Now, Shanahan, we know, offensive genius, is certainly going to put him in a really good position to succeed. But I do think that there could be, again, I think people laugh at me when I say this. I think that there is a world in which this team doesn't make the playoffs. Like I think that is a real range of outcome for this team.
You're going to need some injuries. The NFC is rather weak this year, right? So you got to think 9 wins probably makes the playoffs. So you need some injuries to fall below that nine win threshold. But again, this is a injury prone team. It's going to be the defense that really needs to handle their business. If you're going to see this team win 12, 13 games again this year, they're going to have to be number 1 or number 2 unit in the National Football League. I think Brock Purdy regresses. I think Sam Darnold is the best quarterback on this roster. That is not a good thing for San Francisco.
Right. Now, the defensive line, linebackers, all that, huge strength here. That defense is going to keep them in a ton of games. I don't think you're going to be looking at this team getting blown out or anything like that, but I do think that there could be some struggles somewhere along the way. The Seahawks, 9-8 last season. Coaching staff stays in place, and they did some adding here on this team. Draymond Jones is in. Julian Love is in. Bobby Wagner is in. Devin Bush is in. Jaron Reed is in. Evan Brown is in. Of course, they had a draft that a lot of people loved in Devin Witherspoon coming in. Jackson Smith-Njigba, who has looked really great so far. Derek Hall out of Auburn is a linebacker that's likely to get some pretty good rotation. And then also, of course, Zach Charbonnet out of UCLA, that they love running backs. So Pete Carroll just loves running backs. If he could roster 14 running backs, he would roster 14 running backs. So we do have that. Now, there were some losses. There's not all gains here. Quentin Jefferson's gone. Al Woods, Poona Ford, Rashad Penny's out of there. So is Travis Homer, Ryan Neal, and Cody Barton. They're all gone as well. Now, just like we just mentioned here, Geno Smith takes a step forward. However, this offensive line is definitely a question mark. Now, they could this is both tackles are second-year guys. We tend to see second-year offensive linemen at least play a little bit better, but certainly had kind of rough campaigns here. So I think that Geno Smith maybe only goes as far as this offensive line takes him.
Yeah, the one plus for Geno Smith is that his strengths are the way plays very well into NFL defenses today, right? The NFL defense is playing too high shells, not allowing the big play, plays into Geno Smith's hands where he wants to be able to check the ball down, get it out of his hands quick. He's willing to throw it out to the backs. That's something Seattle had a lot of success with last year. This wide receiving core should be absolutely phenomenal. You've got DJ Metcalf. You've got Tyler Lockett. You've got Smith-Njigba. So you've got the weapons on the outside. The running back room is actually very good. You mentioned the second-year lineman. That, to me, is the entire key around the Seattle team. We saw both offensively and defensively last year that their rookies hit a wall in week 12, week 13, and they were not able to play as well later in the season. You saw Geno Smith's numbers regress because they did not play as well late in the season. They need to take a step forward, and they need to be good for 17 games. If they are, this is the best team in the NFC West. They need that to happen. It's a question mark, but this, to me, is less of a question mark than what you have at the top of the question mark list in San Francisco with that Brock Purdy situation and not knowing what's happening there at quarterback. I have more faith that this Seattle team is going to win 10 games than I do San Francisco will.
Yeah, we will continue talking the NFC West here on the other side and a little bit more here about the Seattle Seahawks team. But I do have a bet in. I have a bet in on this team to win this division. And like I said, I feel good about it. The more I dig in here and the more that I see from Smith-Njigba, I think it was kind of the perfect addition here on the offensive side of the ball. You do have Tyler Lockett probably on the downside of his career, but now this takes some of the pressure off of him as well. I'm pretty bullish on the Seahawks team, and honestly, I do believe that Jackson Smith-Njigba has a pretty big season this year. I think the situation that he's in, I understand that there's always the Pete Carroll factor, and we know that Pete Carroll loves running the ball, and we know that Pete Carroll loves running backs and all that. They just paid Geno Smith a lot of money. And I think they understand the weapons that they have. And I think we're going to see at least a little bit more pass heavy team this year. If you look what we've seen in the very limited amount of stuff that's coming out of training camp, and of course in the preseason game, Drew Lock finding Jackson Smith and Jigba all over the place. Mike, you look, most rookie receiving yards, you can find almost 3-1 on Jackson Smith and Jigba. I think if you look at his receiving yardage total sitting at, you can find as low as 650.5 out there. I think he's the clear number 2. And I think that there's a chance, and again, we talk about these range of outcomes. I think he could be kind of like 1A, 1B with DK Metcalf when it's all said and done. I think he's that polished. I think he's that good. And I think that he is a guy at 650.5, and certainly to lead rookie receivers in yardage. I think it's a bet that I really, really like. I think he's going to have a lot of success in this offense.
Yeah, you talk about an interview that happened 2 years ago in Ohio State's wide receiver room when Olave and Garrett Wilson and Smith and Jigba were asked, who's the best wide receiver? And both Olave and Garrett Wilson pointed right to Smith and Jigba. They all believe that he was the best one in that room at that time. He looked phenomenal last night. He was wide open. Locke missed him multiple times, and he was consistently getting open over the middle. And that's what makes him such a threat inside this offense. Tyler Lockett is going to blow the top off the defense, right? He's going to be running deep, running those long post routes. You've got DJ Metcalf who can do everything. Smith and Jigba can go over the middle and catch the football. He can run solid out routes. He can go deep. He's able to do it all for this offense as that slot receiver guy. I think he's going to have I think he probably out-targets Lockett here in his rookie season versus what you're going to see from Lockett. You may see a higher total from Lockett from a receiving perspective. I think you're going to get more targets to Smith and Jigba just because of where he's going to be and the style of offense that Geno Smith likes to throw the football in plays into Smith and Jigba's hands again as well. So I thought that was a phenomenal draft pick for them. On the defensive side of the ball, adding Witherspoon too is a sneaky good add. We heard so many people talking about Witherspoon going 6. He's clearly the best cornerback in here. He's a bigger dude. He is going to be a shutdown corner day one in the NFL. I think he's got a chance to be Defensive Rookie of the Year. I thought this draft was phenomenal. If they can put all the pieces together, this Seattle team is as good or better than San Francisco day one on paper.
Yeah, I think I really do like to see him again. That offensive line is the only thing that gives me a little bit of pause, but we shall see. Again, we typically do see offensive linemen in year 2, if they're any good, kind of take that big leap. And again, we also find out if they're not any good there in year 2. So we shall see how it plays out there in Seattle. Los Angeles Rams, we're looking at a win total of 6.5, as we told you in our poll as well. Now, this is a team in which they got a lot of work to do because they went all in. They won the Super Bowl. And so you got the desired outcome. So I do not fault what they did. But because of that, you find the cupboard kind of bare. They were 5-12 last year. Mike LaFleur is the new offensive coordinator, same title that he had with the Jets. And they did next to nothing in the offseason, and they had to kind of tear it down. When you go all in like they did, it's really, really tough to add in free agency. So not really any additions at all on the offensive or defensive side of the ball. They did lose. They traded Jalen Ramsey out of town. Leonard Floyd is now with the Bills. Allen Robinson is with the Steelers. Bobby Wagner is in Seattle. Ashawn Robinson is a Giant. Nick Scott is with the Bengals. Greg Gaines is with the Bucks. They even lost their kicker and punter, Mike, like along the way as well for this Rams team. So again, it's like you can look at the starting 22 and you can at least say, okay, Cooper Kupp and Aaron Donald and Matthew Stafford and et cetera. So like you do have all of that, but there's basically nobody behind these guys. The offensive line is legitimately the worst offensive line in all of football. And if Matthew Stafford, I think he's lost a step. I don't know for sure. Maybe that was just that injury last year that we saw that was really, really worse than maybe he made out to be, but it looked like maybe he had lost a step too. I think the bear case for this team could be one of the absolute worst in the NFL, and I think a bull case is probably still only like 7 or 8 wins. I just don't see a ton from this squad.
Absolutely brutal first 10 games, too, when you look at the schedule. They're at Seattle versus San Francisco, at the Bengals, at the Colts, that's winnable, versus the Eagles, versus the Cardinals, that's winnable, versus the Steelers, at the Cowboys, at the Packers, then versus Seattle. That is a brutal opening 10 games when you're looking at the Rams. I would be surprised if they are any better than 3-7 in that spot. I would expect they're going to either be, let's say 1-9, maybe 2-8, somewhere in there. That's the problem if you're trying to go over 6.5 with this team, because that's the best version of the Rams you're going to get is the early season version of the Rams. And those first 3 games, especially with Seahawks, Niners, Bengals right out of the gate, that's going to be tough to pull any wins out of. And you need to win early if you have a team that doesn't have a very deep roster. That's exactly what the Rams don't have. So as soon as you have any injuries here, this team regresses significantly, and the schedule is an absolute brutal stretch there early. So hard for me to get behind the Rams here over 6.5.
Yeah, you look, and they are very likely to be underdogs in every game except for 3. Currently, they are favorites against both games against the Cardinals, and they are just a 1-point favorite currently over the Colts there in Week 4. But who knows what the Colts look like by the time Week 4 rolls around? Maybe they end up being a dog there on the road to this Colts team. You have Aaron Donald, but the thing is like if things start to go off the rails here, do we start to hear trade talk? Does Aaron Donald go to them and say like, "Hey, listen, I don't want to be part of a rebuild. This is towards the end of my career. Trade me out of here. Put me on a team that can contend." I don't think that's out of the range of possibilities either. And I think that we could be seeing maybe some of these other guys on the move. Like, would they actually trade Cooper Kupp? I mean, probably not likely, but I don't think it's crazy if that comes down to, if this team, like you mentioned, if they're 3-7, 2-8, they're going to get phone calls on these guys at the very least.
Yeah, Stafford and Donald specifically would be the guys who you get calls about. I'm not sure the value you get back for Stafford at this point, but if you're 2-8, if you're 1-9 and you're sitting in that position and you're looking at a high draft pick with multiple top tier quarterbacks sitting there in college, I think you got to listen to whatever the Stafford ask is there. And Aaron Donald, I agree with you. I mean, even look at the end of the season with these guys. They were holding guys out who probably could have played if those games mattered late in last season. You don't want to be sitting in that situation again here where you have guys who have some value on your roster who are just sitting because you're not good, because this isn't a quick rebuild either. You mentioned there with Aaron Donald not wanting to be a part of it. This is a 3-4 year rebuild. Yeah. And I agree with everything you said at the start too. Look, they went all in. They won an NFL title. You cannot knock them for going all in. Now they're paying the price from what they did. And it's going to take a couple years for them to be able to get all the way back. I don't see them moving Cooper Kupp. He's just too good. But Stafford and Donald, I think, are both on the table.
Yeah, and it's this defense, again, outside Aaron Donald, likely going to be starting a third-round rookie at defensive end, maybe 2 third-round rookies at defensive end. The offensive line, like I said, projected to be one of the worst in the NFL. They're going to have a second-round rookie at left guard. They're going to move their center from last year to right guard. It could be a mess there for the Rams for sure, but not as bad as we are going to see down in Phoenix. This is the Arizona Cardinals, which I think is going to be the worst team in the NFL. I actually think they should be the worst team in the NFL. You might find a team with the most unique position we have seen in a very long time, Mike, because if they have the number 1 overall pick and the Texans are also as bad as, at least the projections could be and the win total says, they could have not only the top pick, they could have the top 2 picks if the Texans are terrible, at least 2 of the top 3 or 4 picks in the draft. And that puts them in a really great position because then they can either decide to move on from Kyler Murray or they are going to get a ton for these picks that they have at the top of the draft. And we talk about a long rebuild for the Rams. The Cardinals might actually be in place to do a fairly quick rebuild given the situation that they're in.
Yeah, they have the opportunity to get a ton of assets, especially if they end up with the number 1 and number 2 pick. You're in a situation where you can take Caleb Williams and then you can trade that Drake May pick sitting in that 2 spot, get a ton of first-round capital back for them, possibly get a couple players as well. Just a wonderful situation for Arizona after what's going to be an awful year. They're going to be very, very, very bad. The big question for me is, can they trade Kyler Murray? I mean, this contract it's tough. I mean, especially considering all the rumors around the fact that he doesn't want to actually watch film, the fact that he just wants to play video games. Not a guy a lot of organizations are willing to give you a ton for. So the question with the contract and with the attitude is, what can you get for Kyler Murray? Because in my mind, you have to move on from him here. If you get a chance to get Caleb Williams, he could be a generational talent. I realize Kyler Murray is really good, but he's not that guy. Right. And he's never going to be a Caleb Williams-esque level guy.
Yeah, and, like you said, I don't know what you get back for him, but you get something back, and then you're certainly going to get something for that pick that the Texans have as well. So this Cardinals team, while they're going to be absolutely horrible this year, they can bounce back fairly quick. I do not think that's the case for the Rams.
Go to VSiN.com/subscribe to become a VSiN Pro subscriber today.